Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. In this session, we're going to check out a brand new plugin from Maag Audio called the Magnum-K. It's been created by Brainworx in conjunction with Maag Audio. So this is a very slightly different type of compressor. It's got some really cool features to it. And it's based on Maag Audio's original sort of hardware concept for this. And then obviously they've taken it to the next level by adding some extra features and things like that that you can't get on the hardware, because obviously it's a lot more easily created when it comes to creating plugins. So they worked with Maag EQ to make sure that the plugin represented the hardware as best as it could. And it's a unique compressor in the fact that it has two compressors in it, one that looks more of a standard style and another one which is based on a concept that they wanted originally, which sort of, the way it's described, it sounds more like a dynamic EQ where it compresses around 2.5K or an area around there, just to get you to get some loudness, but without causing some annoying frequencies and pain in your ear. But then on top of that, they also then added their Maag EQ with their airband, etc., which they're really famous for. And I've used the individual plugins of their Maag EQs, use them all the time, and I really like them. So I'm interested to see how this whole unit works together with the compression side of things as well, and to see whether it would be a worth purchase to use in my mixes and masters going forward. At the moment, I'm just using a demo trial, and we'll see how it goes. So let's get into it and check it out. Okay, so here we have the plugin in a Cubase session. And as you can see, if you've used any of the Maag Audio plugins or hardware before, it's got that distinctive look of it with the very light blue and the bright colors. And yeah, it's style of knobs, buttons, etc. It is very much the Maag EQ look. So you can see it's quite detailed here. So the hardware unit itself would be basically just one of these single items. And obviously being a plugin, we can now have two for the price of one, and then Brainworx added in this whole other section down here. So the original concept of this compressor started out from this whole little part in here, which is the K comp. And it was just supposed to be a simple way of compressing a certain sort of range or peak in frequencies that can get a little bit annoying and harsh and painful to your ears. And he wanted to get the most volume out of his instruments or vocals, etc., without it becoming painful. So the way it's described, it sounds like it works like a dynamic EQ. So just to run through the settings quickly here, we've got some normal plugin settings here where we can do some undo, redo, bypass. We can do some ABCD comparisons, copy, paste, reset. There's a headroom setting here, which I'm guessing we can adjust that to reduce the headroom to get more compression to happen. But I probably will most likely leave that as it is. When we go into mid-side mode, we can then solo the mid and we can solo the side mode. At the moment, we're in left and right. You can see the L and R over here. And each of these work identically. As you can see, they're exactly the same. And you can have them linked or you can have them unlinked. So we could adjust each individually if we wanted to have different settings on each side, or we could link them, and whichever control you move, it'll happen on the opposite side. as I said, you can obviously switch over to mid-side. And again, you could have them linked so they still work the same, whether it's mid or side. Or you could unlink it and you could do different settings on the side and the mid, which is very helpful. Let's just go back to our standard left-right here. So we've got an input attenuation here that we could dial the input down if it's a little bit too hot and the compressor's overworking and we don't want that. We can bring that back to reduce our input level so our compressor doesn't get so much audio. We've got a peak light here, so this just lights up when the signal reaches 0 dBFS. And we've got a signal here which lights up when there is a signal coming through it altogether. So input gain obviously is working opposite to input attenuation in that if our signal is a little bit too low and we're not getting the required level of compression that we want, we can boost it so that it goes into the compressor a little bit hotter than originally before using this setting. All right, then we've got this Magnum comp here, and it's got some fairly similar settings to other compressors and a few different ones here. So generally with a normal compressor, you're going to adjust your ratio to get the amount of compression you want alongside with the threshold and attack and release. But let's just concentrate on these two here. So I'll come back to this setting in a minute. So obviously these settings here work the same as anywhere else. You can see the value pop up. So you can see it's not labeled on the display, but as you move it, you do get a value there. So you can go all the way up to 10 to 1, or you can come all the way down to some very small settings there of 0.5. So generally when we're using a compressor, we're going to set our ratio. So let's say we go for a 2 to 1. Then we're going to set our threshold so that we determine at what level this threshold will be when the audio, so the audio has to go above that threshold before the compressor starts to work. Now we also have this little LED here, which is going to be blue when we play with it. And it states in the manual that it indicates the level of compression. And the brighter the LED, the more compression being applied. So as it starts to compress, generally what happens is you're just going to compress, and depending on the threshold and the ratio, you could get a ton of compression or a little bit of compression. Now that still works to some respect, but what they did was they also added in this compression range, which basically tells the compressor that use these settings, but don't go above this dB range of compression. So at here, what we're stating is that we only want to go up to 4 dB compression or gain reduction at a time. So if you've used any other compressor, you know, depending on where the signal is and how hard it's coming through, it could be doing any sort of gain reduction from, 1 dB up to 10 dBs. And what this is doing here is it's basically setting some controls to say that I might push this audio through really hard, but I don't want you to go any further than 4 dB of gain reduction at a time. And we can change that to 8, 12, and 16. So it gives us a little bit of a buffer and some extra control in how much compression we want to apply, because we may not want to apply too much. Okay, and then we've got a side chain here, and again, with other compressors, it's going to work basically the same. So off means that there's no side chain, and 40 is 40 hertz. So what this is doing is it's not affecting the audio signal as such, but it's telling the compressor what to listen to or what not to listen to. So in this case here, if I set this to 40 hertz, the compressor is going to ignore anything below 40 hertz that comes through and not respond to that as a determination of when to compress. it's still going to compress the entire audio when it needs to compress. But for example, if you had a kick drum and it was sitting at 35 hertz, it's a real sub, and all the rest of the audio is going below the threshold, but that sub is going above the threshold. If I had this off, it means that the compressor would start to compress all of the audio because the sub is going above the threshold. Now, if I put that up to 40 hertz or higher, because the sub's the only instrument or only frequency element that's going above the threshold, now the compressor will ignore it. So it won't compress any of the audio until something above 40 hertz goes over the threshold. So it's a very helpful feature, especially if you've got some very heavy low-end instruments in your song, if you're doing dance music, that sort of stuff, because they can generally get a compressor to overwork, and that can make the rest of your audio sound bad. So in this way here, you can tell it to ignore that very loud thumping kick, but concentrate on the rest of the audio itself. Now you can also set it to external. So if you did an external side chain where you actually had it listening to a kick or a snare or something else, then it could trigger or ignore that setting there. Okay, then we've got our attack and release as any standard sort of compressor here. We've got fast, slow, so that's the best indication they've got there. But the manual does state the values. So fast is 5 milliseconds, slow is 200 milliseconds for the attack, and the release is fast 100 milliseconds to 1.2 seconds. Okay, so we've got this button here, which is a feedback or feed forward type, and it sets the method for the compressor. And this function here basically changes, as they say in the manual, the control signal used for compression is taken from the input or the output. So it's sort of like where the detection circuit is, whether it does the detection and determination before feeding into the compressor, or it comes through the compressor and then back out and fed back into it. And they state the feed forward one can create a little bit more aggressive style compression. So we'll have a listen to that as we go. All right, so in the middle here, we have our second compressor, which is the K-Comp compressor. So this compressor here is very simple to use. Obviously, we've got a button and a knob. And what it does is it focuses around the 3K range. And it was a particular frequency that Maag Audio wanted to control. So we've got an in button here, which just engages it or turns it off, turns it on, turns it off. We've got, again, a little blue LED, which again is going to go brighter depending on how much compression is happening. And then we've got our threshold here, setting here. And this threshold knob works just like any other compressor threshold, but just keeping in mind here, this section here really is only concentrating on the 3K range itself. So as I said, it works like sort of like a dynamic EQ or a multi-band compressor, but just with that single band that's sitting around the 3K range. And then we've got an EQ section here, and as you'll see, it's called a parallel EQ, and it's basically sitting side by side with the compressor. So it takes the original uncompressed audio, passes it through this EQ, and then blends it back in with the compressor to come out at the end. Okay, so it's a really good way to get some really good compression, but then to add back in some of the stuff that you lose with compression. So if you lose some of the low end, you can add it back in by blending some more parallel EQ back in. Or if you lose some top end, you can add some more top end back in again with the parallel EQ. So it's a really great feature in that. Now, you could obviously do this with two separate units. You could have a separate EQ and a separate compressor, and then use your DAW to create parallel chains and blend them back in. But the beauty of this is they've done it in one hardware unit or one plugin and given that feature to you here, so you don't have to go and create those chains of parallel processing everything. You can just do it straight in this plugin as it is. So we've got a gain control here, which is basically working with this low mid frequency setting. So it's obviously the amount of boost that you're going to place on this EQ. And this in button here is turning on the low mid frequencies. So we've got some frequency settings here, but what you'll also see before I talk about the frequencies is this other setting here, which is a Q. And it's just the same as any other Q in a EQ. It sets the width or the bandwidth of the bell shape for your settings, and you've got just two settings instead of a variable control bandwidth. You've just got two hard coded settings. You've got wide or you've got tight, and you can see here the values change to suit which way you go. So you can see what the values are. So you've got, this sub range here, which it's not really stated what it is. It's an undefined sort of value there. So you just have to listen to that. Then you got 57, 88, etc. And if we go across to tight, then again, so you pick your frequency, you pick your bandwidth, you turn it on, and then you set the amount of gain control. And then you've got these other three controls here, which is about the air band. So we turn that on. We're now talking about the high frequencies, which is a shelf. And again, you've got a gain control, and you've got 10K, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40K. And then after all of that, we've then got a makeup gain control. So we can balance our plugin out so that when we bypass it and unbypass it, we get the same level. And then if that wasn't all enough, what they do is then they've got a soft limiter. So now we could push the signal and get some more volume out of it, get a little bit of limiting going on it to get that extra loudness out of our song or instrument or whatever we want to do there. So we can engage it with this button here, turn the soft limiter on or off, and then we can set our threshold. So we can go down to minus 15 dBFS or 7, 3, up to 3 dBFS. So depending on what the level of our audio signal is and what we want to target for and how much soft limiting we want to target, then that'll determine what we set this to. And then engage is basically engaging the entire section altogether. All right, so that's a hell of a lot of talking. So let's get in and actually play with a song now and see what we can get out of it. All right, so we've got a song here. So we're just going to try a few settings so you can see the signal lights come on. We're not really peaking. Obviously we're peaking now. Don't really want to peak anyway. So let's set a ratio. Again, I do these quite heavy when I do these examples and demonstrations because we want to make it more obvious what we're doing. But generally, you're going to go a lot more subtle when you're going to start doing this sort of stuff. So we got a tiny little bit of compression going on there. You can see a little bit there. Push the input gain. see it responding heavily to the kick there. Turn the side chain on, it's a lot less. So you can hear how heavy that compression is right now. It's got a fast attack, fast release. So if we change our comp range when we're compressing this heavily, so you can see there I'm absolutely slamming this compressor right now, but we can limit the compression to 4 dB only. Or if I let it go up to 16 dB, we start compressing really badly. So now I won't change any of the settings, I'll just flick between the feedback and feed forward. Now see how high it is with feed forward, feedback, not so much. Obviously again I'm exaggerating the settings here. So if we bring in our other compressor now, just to show what this one's doing, I'll get the other compressor out of the way. Hear it tuck that middle bit in there. Obviously this is a very guitar orientated song, so a lot of the frequencies is exactly going to be in this range, in this 3K range. It's where the vocals are going to sit, it's where guitars are going to sit. Sometimes they can be overpowering and get a little bit too annoying, noisy, can hurt your ears, etc. So the whole point of this is to keep control of it. It's just to tuck it in as you go. Now, I've got it on the full setting here, obviously, but we can control it less here. You also notice the gain reduction meter here does not get impacted by this, only with this, and you'll only see this little LED going. So you might want to be a little bit more subtle. Alright, so let's go back to some extreme compression settings here. Let's see what our EQ can do. So you can hear there how easy it is to bring back some of that low end and top end life that you might have lost during the compression phase there. Obviously, you don't want to add it all back in because then it's what was the point of compressing. But sometimes you can lose a little bit too much with compression to get the results you're after, and you just want to add a little bit of extra back in. You've obviously got your makeup gain. And then we've got our soft limit here. So you can see that LED change there. So as the amount of limiting that occurs is happening, this LED changes color. Starts off at green. Green is pretty much nothing. Transitions all the way through to pink and red at its extreme levels. Now, I mean, I've hit the limit here on the DBFS. Can't go any further. So to get it in the red, I would have to... Obviously, we've got a lot of very bad distortion there. So you'd want to control this as much as you can and get it to what level you want that limiter. Okay, and then what's not available on the hardware is this whole section down here that Brainworx have added. So again, we've got an engage button. So this just engages this individual unit itself. It's not the whole plugin, it's just this part, or brings it in. So if you've watched my video on the SPL Iron, this section here will look very familiar, and that's because it is pretty much almost identical in a way. Same functionality, same concept. So you can see here, as I said before, we've got this parameter link, which links the two modules together or unlinks them. We've got the mid side or left and right. We've got a sidechain link here, which when you're using the sidechain mode, even though the controls themselves are linked, each unit, each module here is fed with a different sidechain signal. So I guess it's being sent the right and the left or whatever it is. And if you actually activate the sidechain link here, what happens is the sidechain signals are mixed together and then they're used to control both units. All right, so we've got this section here where Again, as I said in the SBL Iron video I did, I went all through this. And what it is it's a concept where they're trying to emulate different analog channels on like a mixing desk or whatever hardware it is. So if you had multiple hardware units, they would all respond slightly different because analog hardware is not 100% consistent. It's not like a computer program. There's variances, tolerances, all that sort of stuff. So certain bits of hardware, even though they're made identically, will sound slightly different. So they've tried to replicate that here. If you go into digital mode, it sets both the left and right or the mid side to the same channel. So even though it's still sort of replicating some analog qualities, because it's setting both the channels to be identical, it's more emulating like it was a digital emulation of the analog. Now, if we turn the digital off, you'll see that we've now got channels 1 and 2. So the left and right, in theory, will have different analog qualities to them. And we can skip through all different channels, which all, in theory, should have a different quality to them. And you can even press this random one here if you don't really care which channels you use. You just want to randomize your selection because you just want to try a few different out and see if one jumps out at you or if they all sound the same to you. So the mono maker feature here, you can turn it on and off, and then you can set the frequency range. And what that does is where you set this frequency, anything below that will stay more into the middle. So it will mono that frequency range. So if you like to make sure that your bass is really centered, you can use this control here to set it to a value where your bass is under, so if you want to go 184, whatever it is, then that bass frequency range there from 184 down will become more mono and will not be so wide in your stereo mix. The other feature you got here is the stereo width, so we can turn that on and we can increase the stereo width of the audio as well, or we could even decrease it and make it mono if we wanted to. And then we've got a mix control, which is something that's very useful on compressors if you want to do parallel compression without going to all the trouble to set up all the channels and tracks, etc., to create a parallel compression. So you can turn this on, you could compress quite hard, and then you could wind down the mix so that you're blending in a lot of the original uncompressed signal with the affected compressed signal, or you can leave it to 100% wet, and this is totally affecting your signal. You've also got a high pass filter here. This one actually is not just a detector circuit like the sidechain. This one here actually affects the audio. So it is going to EQ out or filter out the low end if you set it up too high. And then we've got this pre-post setting, which applies to this high pass filter. It determines where this filter is applied. So in pre-mode, the filter is applied right after the input gain control here before it goes into the compressor. So if you want to filter out some low end and not have the compressor even hear or compress that signal, then you would set it to pre. Otherwise, if you set it to post, it comes into play post the soft limiter. So it'll go through all of the compressor, all of the EQ blended together, and just before it gets to the soft limiter and then out the other end, it'll then do the high pass filter. And then we've also got a nice little metering section here, some correlation, things like that to go with our stereo width, our balance, and some gain reduction meters and stuff down here to show us what we're going to get. So these are additions, obviously. Like I said, the hardware, you've got these little lights. Now you've got probably a bit more control here because you've got this. Now, as I said, you can go into unlinking things here, which I'm not going to go into at this stage because if you've watched any other my other videos or anything else, you'll know unlinking, having different settings on each side, what that will do. The whole point is to know what the compressors are doing. And similarly with mid side, I could show you it affecting the mid or the side, but we've done that before plenty of times, and it's pretty obvious what happens. So we'll just quickly flick through these settings here, and then we'll have a bit of a play with this TMT section. So our mono maker here, we go up to there, we basically make most of the track mono, up to 22K. Just tucks that bass in, maybe not so obvious on this song because it's already fairly well controlled. And then we've got our stereo width. Pretty obvious. And our dry wet. And our high pass the filters, or we could do it after. So if you watch the gain reduction meter here, you can see, because I'm doing a really fairly high filter of 120, it's taking out the kick drum. If you see when I'm on post, you'll see the gain reduction doesn't really fluctuate with the kick, it doesn't move. But if I put it to post, you'll see it still moves with the kick. So that means the compressor is responding to the kick, and I'm filtering out the kick down here. So you'll see it's moving with the kick there in post because it's seeing the kick. Now, it's not so much. Still getting some because there's some above 120, but not all of it. Okay, and then we've got our modes here. So let's just flick through, as I've already explained it. Let's see if we can hear a difference. So they're very subtle differences there. Again, if you want to see a more detailed explanation of this, go and check out my SPL Iron tutorial video, because in there I actually do a phase reversal so that you can hear what the difference between the different channels is. Now, they're probably not exactly the same in this model, but it gives you an idea of how subtle the changes are and that they are different on each channel. So it's about finding the right thing for the right sound you're going for, I guess. Now, I'm obviously showing this plugin on an entire song, more of like a mastering process here, but This is obviously ideal to be worked on individual tracks like drums, vocals, guitars, whatever. You can put this plugin on anything you like and use all of these features for that there. So there you go. There is the Maag Audio Magnum-K plugin created by Brainworx. It's available on the Plugin Alliance website. So go check it out. Try out the demo. Let me know what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe. Check out some other videos and some free content that you can get over on my website. So hopefully it's been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.